Hello TCMS, Mrs. Martin here. In today's video, I'm going to cover how we can use results from a Google form to create 4 visual representations of data: a two-way table, a grouped bar graph, a stacked frequency bar graph, and a stacked percent bar graph. Here you'll find the data that we used to develop Notes 11. Remember that our driving question was whether or not your major indicated if you were comfortable with taking the COVID-19 vaccine. Recall that we created a Google form where we asked 2 questions. I can click on row 1 and select my text wrapping options to wrap text and be able to see the entire question. We asked our classmates, do you plan to get into a STEAM field when you leave high school? And do you plan to get the COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available to you? Here are the responses from 22 of your peers. Let's begin by color coding some of these boxes using conditional formatting. This is just going to give us an opportunity to see our answers and be able to sift through the data a little easier. To do this, I click on the column letter I would like to format. Then I go to the Format menu and select Conditional Formatting. In this menu, we'll take care of all the formatting we need to make data easier to look at. First, let's color our yeses green. To do this, go to the Format Rules, the section that says Format Cells If, and change is not empty to text is exactly. With this, we're telling Google that if a cell contains exactly the words that we type in here, then it will color that cell a specific color. We'll type the response we want green. In this case, yes. Notice I forgot to capitalize the Y, but it still did its job in column B. Thus, this box is not case sensitive. When I'm done, I can click the button that says Done. Now, I mentioned in class that this was enough to have an easier time differentiating between responses. Yes is green and the no boxes are white. But to practice our skills, let's keep formatting. While still in this menu and with B still selected, I can click Add Another Rule. This time, I still want to format cells if text is exactly, but I want to format it if it's exactly no. And we're going to color this orange. And so we've formatted column B. Let's do the same thing with column C. To do that, all I need to do is go over and just click C. And we can continue our conditional formatting rules. Add another rule and follow the same process. Text is exactly yes. And this time, since this column is our response variable, I'm going to stick to the colors that I want to use in my future bar graphs. So I'll select a red color. For no, text is exactly no. I will select a blue color. And for maybe, text is exactly maybe, I'll select a green color. Of course, the options are endless when it comes to colors and color schemes. To be honest, you're often better at making color combinations than I am. Now that I'm finished, I'll go ahead and select the Exit button so I can close that menu, give myself some room, and come back to look at my data. Now that everything is formatted, we'll go ahead and create a two-way table. Find a good space near your data and start building. Remember, the explanatory variables are my column labels and my response variables are my row labels. Typically, in my two-way table, the top left box is left empty, and the response variables make up the following rows. In our notes, we went with yes, no, and maybe. And for our explanatory variables, we had STEAM majors and non-STEAM majors. And of course, the habit that I want you all to develop is to include a total column and a total row. Now, this isn't the most formal looking table, so let's use some Google Sheets features to make this table look a little nicer. A big part of data analysis for me is making these things visually pleasing and easy to read. So I'm going to start by outlining my table so that it's clear that it is in fact a two-way table. To do this, I'll click on cell D2, hold my click, and drag across to G6. Then in my menu up here, I will add some borders. All the borders, in fact. Another thing that I might like to do, and this is just, I suppose, a formatting feature, I can select this column and I can right justify it. A common thing you've seen me do is color the boxes black and change the font to white so they really stand out. And I can do that to both column and row. But again, formatting and coloring features, have fun with that. That's up to you. Now I can go ahead and use all this conditional formatting to fill in the boxes in my table. For example, my STEAM majors, those are all the green boxes because they said yes to being a STEAM major. My STEAM majors that said yes include this row, that was one person, and this row, that was a second person, and this row, that was a third person. 3 people who said yes to being a STEAM major and said yes to getting the vaccine. So I will go into box E3 and type in a 3. And I'll continue doing this for all the boxes in this table. So my STEAM majors that said no, again, I look at my 5 STEAM majors and I find that none of them said no. So I put a 0. Finally, my STEAM majors who are on the fence and they said maybe, I've got 1 and 2. Now in this next box, I could add them up in my head and put a 5. There's nothing wrong with that. The numbers are small and they're fairly reasonable for you to do some mental math and do some adding. But since we're in Google Sheets, we might as well continue to learn the different features it has and become proficient with some of its formulas. So instead of typing in a 5 based off of my mental math, and in case these numbers start to get increasingly large, considering the data we'll face in TCMS, I'm going to use a Google Sheets formula to add the boxes for me. The formula I will use to add is the sum formula. To do this, with my box highlighted, I will type an equal sign. And then I'll type the word sum. Google Sheets starts to predict things for you and I can click on it. And it'll open up a parentheses for me to start selecting boxes that I want to add up. I have 2 options here. Since the table is very easy for me to see and there's only 3 rows, I can click and drag across all the boxes I would like to add up. Then I can close the parentheses and hit enter. Now Google Sheets is asking me to autofill some stuff. That's not even part of our table, so I can go ahead and reject that suggestion. And notice that it still gives us the number 5, which is the number we added in our head, but the formula in this formula line is still the sum of boxes E3 to E5. That way, if my data were to change and I were to get more participants to answer, and for example, I got a STEAM major that actually did say no, the data in the table will update automatically without me having to continue to go back and add everything up. So just a fun feature of Google Sheets that might help us in the future when numbers start to get large. I'm going to undo that change now. So we have our original data. Now I'm going to go ahead and move over to our non-STEAM majors so that I can figure out who's yes, no, and maybe. So non-STEAM majors, those are our oranges. Non-STEAM majors that said yes, I've got 3 here, 1 here, 2 here, 3 more here, and 1 there, for a total of 3, 4, 6, 9, 10. I can type those in here. Non-STEAM majors who said no, I've got 1, 2 of them. And finally, non-STEAM majors who said maybe, I've got 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, for a total of 17 using mental math. And again, let's go ahead and use our sum formula to add the boxes up for us. So to recap, that's equal sign, sum, and I can drag and highlight the boxes I want to add up. Close my parentheses and hit enter. And again, I'm going to reject that autofill. We don't want it to continue filling in boxes outside of our two-way table. Let me share with you another cool feature of Google Sheets. When using the equals sum feature, and when adding up my rows, and it actually works for the columns too. I'm going to reject this autofill one more time because I don't want to go all the way there. Something that Google Sheets does is it kind of predicts what you would want in other boxes of these types of tables. So for example, we're already summing up these 2 boxes of row 3. So if I take this little blue box here and I drag it down, what Google does is it understands you probably want to add up the 2 boxes from row 4. Notice in the formula, it says E4 and F4. And when I click in the formula, Google Sheets does something really nice actually, and it visualizes those 2 boxes for you. It kind of highlights it a light orange so you can see what it is it's adding up. And it looks like it's adding correctly. So we can go ahead and do that for the 3rd box as well. And for the last box too, why not? For our total of 22 participants. Using formulas in Google Sheets takes some getting used to, so feel free to go back in this video and recap this table conversation so you can become more proficient. Now that my table is all set up, let's use Google Sheets features to create our 3 graphs. To create a graph, we highlight the labels and the data. So from box D2, that empty box in the top left corner, all the way down to box F5, which includes just the data for the labels. I left out the totals because Google adds things up automatically, so we can leave that column and that row out of the picture. Now that the info that I need is highlighted, I'm going to go to the Insert menu and select Chart. Now again, Google's going to do what Google does, and it's going to try and predict what it is you might be thinking. And let's see what it's doing here. There are a few problems right off the bat. First major one being that our explanatory variable, STEAM majors and non-STEAM majors, has been used to create a legend. And from our work together, we learned that the legend represents our response variable. The response variable instead is making up the horizontal axis, which should be the explanatory variable. So Google clearly has swapped these 2 variables for us, and we need to fix that. Lucky for us, Google makes that switch very easy. In our chart editor, down towards the bottom, I have an option to switch rows and columns. And now we've taken care of the issue where the legend is now our response variable and our horizontal axis is our explanatory variable. We've got frequency over here in the vertical axis, and we've got some nice clustered charts separated by a large gap between the two parts of our explanatory variable. So we've done what we needed to do with this data and created a graph, but it's always fun with Google Sheets to start playing a little bit with the customization. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the Customize tab and experiment a little with color. Under the Series tab, I can change the colors to match the colors that I used in the conditional formatting of column C, since column C represented our response variables anyway. Yes was a purpley color, and no was a blue color. Finally, maybe was a green color. And now we've got some color coding happening, so we can really start to see some connections between both the responses and the visual representations of the data. The other thing we might want to add is a vertical axis label. To do that, I'm going to go to Chart and Axis Titles, and I'm going to change this drop-down menu to Vertical Axis Title. And I'm going to title it Frequency. Now that I've got everything pretty much labeled and scaled, I'm done with this grouped bar graph. But I've still got two more graphs to go. I've got the stacked frequency bar graph and the stacked percent bar graph. Getting a hold of those is just a matter of a copy paste and a few extra steps. I'm going to go ahead and make this chart a little smaller so I can fit the other two. And what I'll do now is I'm going to click on the chart. I'll access more options by clicking on the three dots, and I will copy chart. Now that the chart is copied, I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to paste it. Now I've just copied and pasted my chart because the data is the same. The only thing I'm trying to do is change the way the chart looks. To access those chart edits again, I'm going to double click on the chart I'd like to change. And all I'm going to do is change the chart type. Instead of a column chart that's grouped, we have other options for column charts. And all I need to do is select the next one on my list, which is a stacked column chart, which is the equivalent of a stacked frequency bar. And now, just like I created in my notes, I've got two bars of equal width, separated by a gap, and color-coded and stacked on top of each other. Notice that the scale of our vertical axis changed, but it's still equally spaced, and it still represents the frequency. Now I've got two bar graphs down, one bar graph to go. I'll go back to Edit and paste another copy of our bar graph. And again, I'll double click and change our chart type. Once more, I go to the column section, and instead of column chart or stacked column chart, I'll select 100% stacked column chart, which is the equivalent of our stacked percent bar graph. And once again, if I'm comparing to my notes, I've got the two bars of equal width with the space in between the two, color coding that matches throughout, and bars that are both at 100% because we were talking about the whole group of STEAM majors and the whole group of non-STEAM majors. One more thing to remember is to change this vertical axis label. I forget it all the time, so hopefully you don't develop that habit like me. You click on frequency when in the stacked percent bar graph. It opens up my chart editor section to change my vertical axis title, and I can type in percent. And now everything is appropriately labeled. To conclude this video, let's recap what we did. We use some formatting to wrap our text and see our questions. We used conditional formatting to color code some of these responses, making it easier to look at the data and count things up. We used borders to create a two-way table with explanatory variable representing the columns and response variable representing the rows. We did a little formatting for those labels to make the tables stand out. We learned a bit about formulas so we can add up boxes without having to do the mental math ourselves. And we learned how to insert charts, making sure that they are labeled and scaled, they have an appropriate legend. We learned how to customize some of those colors, and we learned how to change the charts so that we can have access to a grouped bar graph, a stacked frequency bar graph, and a stacked percent bar graph, with the added bonus of being able to hover over percent boxes and get some extra information for ourselves, again, without having to do all that extra math. When working with statistics, we're often faced with loads of data. Developing skills with programs like Google Sheets gives you the opportunity to work with large chunks of data, to visually represent them, and to spend your time doing the analysis part. A computer is really good at adding, subtracting, and coding pretty pictures, but what it can't do is draw logical and critical thinking conclusions. Only you, the human, can do that. So take some time and become proficient with some of these programs so that in the future you have more time to spend critically thinking about the results of your research. Thanks for watching. Until next time.